Hello. I decided to make this video because I want to talk about the words football and soccer. So it seems a lot of people get triggered by the word soccer and say, "Oh, don't call it soccer. It's football. Uh, we call it football. It's call it football. Don't call it soccer." And I think the mistake that these people are making is they seem to think that football and soccer are synonyms, but they're not. It's the same how car and Rolls Royce are not synonyms. You wouldn't, if somebody said, "Oh yeah, look, he's driving a Rolls Royce," you wouldn't say, "Why? Don't call it a Rolls Royce. It's a car." Or if you see someone with a poodle and you go, "Oh, I like your poodle," if he starts ranting, "It's not a poodle, it's a dog," you'd think he was, weird. And it's the same. So all you're doing when you say soccer, if somebody says soccer, they're just being more specific because football covers many different things. There's soccer. The word soccer is short for association, because the actual official name of the sport is association football. That's because it's not the only type of football. You've also got rugby football, which is another kind of football. You've got American football. You've got Aussie rules football. You've got Gaelic football, and many other types of football. Okay, if we look at a question, if I ask the question, so who invented the game? Who invented the game? Uh well, if you mean who invented football, it's difficult to say because football has been played in England for hundreds of years, going back to medieval times, and before that, the Romans used to play a type of football, and the ancient Greeks did, and in ancient China, going back thousands of years before England even existed, they were playing football. So you can't say that the English invented football. You just can't say it. Football was played before. So England became a country apparently in 927. They were playing football 1,000 years before that. So England did not invent football. But if you asked who invented soccer, then yes, the English invented soccer. So that's the difference. The English invented soccer in 1863 when the Football Association came into existence, and there was a bloke called Ebenezer Cobb Morley who called a meeting in London, and uh, they started soccer, and that was the start of soccer, the 26th of October, 1863. This was also the moment when the games of soccer and rugby split. So you had two types of football uh, came into existence: um, association football or soccer and rugby football. And it was known in those days as rugby football. The governing body of rugby union is called the RFU. F standing for football, the Rugby Football Union. One of the oldest rugby clubs around is Blackheath. Blackheath is called Blackheath FC, Blackheath Football Club. That's what it's called. It's not called Blackheath Rugby Club. They play rugby, but the name is Blackheath FC. And they were actually at that meeting in 1863. And when the Football Association was formed, and they didn't like uh, the rules, the laws of the game that were being set down, and that's where the split happened because teams like Blackheath Football Club decided they wanted to play with different rules. And this is part of the explanation. People go, why do Americans call their sport American football? They should call it hand egg. Well, it's the same reason that uh, rugby is, in fact, a type of football because it comes from the same roots. American football grew out of were of the same football that rugby and soccer come from. Rugby, soccer, and American football are all cousins of each other. They all go back historically to the medieval football that was played in England in the Middle Ages. And in those days, football and rugby were a lot more similar. There are clubs now that play rugby that used to, and there are clubs that play soccer now that back in the olden days before the split, they used to play each other. Rugby teams that are now rugby teams playing rugby, and soccer teams that are now, you know, play association football. They used to play each other because the rules were so similar at first. So originally in rugby, you didn't get points for scoring tries. The only scoring was goals. And the first ever international rugby match that took place in 1871, Scotland beat England 1-0. This was rugby. The first ever rugby match, international rugby match, 1-0 to Scotland because they scored one goal. Scotland scored a goal, just like in soccer. And we people criticise Americans. Oh, why do you call it football? Well, football, English football, soccer, they used to use their hands. When they started it in 1863, as I was saying, when with the invention of soccer, with the formation of the Football Association, the players used to catch the ball. It used to be okay. There was no handball. You could catch the ball just like you can in rugby, and they used to. They weren't allowed to run holding the ball in their hands. They had to kick it, so they could catch it and then kick it. But that was so from 1863 until 1870, for 7 years. That was fine to catch the ball with your hands in soccer. So why are they calling it? Why do they call it football? You're using your hands. Well, that was the case, but we still call it. It's still a kind of football. Now, in my normal life in England, I normally, when I'm talking about soccer, I normally call it football. 9 times out of 10, or 99 times out of 100, I will, I would say, probably just say, say, oh, they're playing football or they're playing rugby, because rugby is now not called football really. Generally, people call rugby, just call it rugby. They don't call it. Normally, we don't call it, although it is a type of football. Technically, people don't bother. People just call it rugby. There's rugby union, there's rugby league, two types of rugby basically. So it's contextual. You see, the word soccer is still useful though, because even though the word soccer was created in England to distinguish between rugby football and association football, but it's still useful in certain contexts when you're dealing with people from Australia or America or other places where they have their own types of football. When you know the history about football, you won't it makes sense. You're not going to be saying silly questions like, why do you call it American football? Because that sort of question comes from ignorance of the history of the game. I'm not trying to say you must call soccer soccer, because I don't call it soccer usually, depending on the context. When it's understood that what we're talking about is okay, it's football. And in America, why should Americans have to call it something different? In their context, they know what they're talking about is football. But in other contexts, it's helpful to say American football or soccer. So the point of this video is not to say, oh, we should call it soccer. It's just to say, call it football if you want to, but don't excoriate people if they prefer to call it soccer. All they're doing is being more precise.